Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. We are looking at the Western RPG as a genre today, what it is that we like about Western RPGs and why they are different to the Japanese RPG, because we obviously cover a lot of Japanese RPGs on this channel, but I don't often get the chance to talk about Western RPGs to the same extent. This last couple of weeks has been a bit different because we've had a lot of them release close to one another. Kingdoms of Amalur, which is the game that you're seeing on the screen in front of you, that released just this week, and it is a very good game indeed. You can check out my review on digitallydownloaded.net. Basically, I loved it though. I didn't think we'd ever see Kingdoms of Amalur again for commercial reasons, but we have, and I'm very grateful for that. But it's not the only one. There was also Pathfinder Kingmaker, which released a couple of weeks ago now, and that's a 150-hour plus game in its own right, so I have been spending a lot of time with it. Wasteland 3 also released. I'm not reviewing that for digitallydownloaded.net, I just ran out of time, but someone else on the team is. And then we have Baldur's Gate 3 to look forward to as well, and anybody who enjoys the Western RPG genre is very much looking forward to Baldur's Gate 3. So with all of that activity happening in the genre, I thought it would be worth doing a video talking about what it is about the Western RPG that I enjoy anyway, that the differences that I think it has to the Japanese RPG, because I do think they are very distinct genres and they shouldn't be talked about in the same light, and they're not directly comparable. So Kingdoms of Amalur is nothing like Final Fantasy, for example. And yeah, I just thought it'd be an interesting time to talk about the genre because there's a lot of activity happening there. All the footage you see in this video is taken from Amalur. I wanted to show off what the game's about. It's the first 10 or so hours, so there are no major spoilers in there, but again, this is not talking specifically about Amalur. I'm just using that footage because I like the game a great deal. Alright, so let's talk about the differences between the Western RPG and the JRPG. Possibly the most obvious one, which people notice very quickly, is that the Western RPG gives control over the narrative to the player. So with a JRPG like a Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, you are really playing along with a narrative that has already been written for you. You need to play well, you need to be able to beat the bosses, you need to level your characters up nicely, and all of that kind of stuff. You need to be able to explore the world to find out where to go next. So it's not like a visual novel in that you're not actively participating in the gameplay, but a Japanese RPG has been written for you. You can't control which characters live or die, and a good example of that being Final Fantasy VII Remake. As much as I would have loved Jessie to survive that, she didn't. Spoiler alert. But yeah, you don't have control over the characters or the narrative direction. Whereas with Western RPGs, there is a much more concentrated effort to give control of the writing of the story to the players. That harkens back right to the origins of the genre. There was a game which was well before Baldur's Gate took the Western RPG mainstream. There was a game called Wake of the Ravager, and I distinctly remember it blowing my mind as a kid, because there was one particular scene where you needed to ally with a secret society that was resisting the evil empire that was basically running the world. And so you allied up with this secret society, and then at one stage you went into their headquarters to find out that they were under attack by the empire. And you had the choice then. You could either stay and fight, and if you did, several major characters would survive, or you could retreat. If you did retreat from the headquarters and then came back later, you would find that all your allies had been killed, including those major characters that had been replaced with undead and whatever. And then you needed to try to piece together what to do next within the context of the story by yourself with no support from your allies. That was a major decision to make, and I accidentally triggered the all the characters die option because I retreated out of the headquarters to heal my characters up. And I didn't realize that, as somebody who'd played a lot of Japanese RPGs beforehand, I didn't realize that the game was not going to wait for me to then take it back up again. If I did something, then the game was going to respond to what I did, which was pretty impressive back then, and the genre has really gone on to solidify that as a core element of its genre. You look at the likes of Skyrim or Dragon Quest or Mass Effect or whatever, the decisions that you make now in Western RPGs really do impact on everything from which characters will join your parties to which characters end up winning in the end. And while most of those games do have a single ending of sorts, the journey to get to that ending will be very different from one player to the next. And it becomes a little bit like a collaborative writing experience between yourself and the creators, where two people who play have very different experiences, and you feel like you are an active participant in the story that is going on around you. That is definitely a very appealing thing about the Western RPG. It does mean, to an extent, that the overarching linear narrative doesn't have the same influence, or it doesn't have the same... It's not the same level of focus as it is with a JRPG. So with a JRPG, the overarching narrative is basically everything, and while the characters are certainly participants in it, and you have your favorite characters and all that kind of stuff, you are really following along with that story being the primary focus. With Western RPGs, it's more about the focus being on your character and their experience of the world, with the narrative being a secondary thing because you're often off doing side quests or getting to know your characters better, or just making those kinds of decisions that have wide-ranging implications for how the rest of the narrative plays out. So that is definitely the kind of the main difference I see between the JRPG and Western RPG. I don't think either is better or worse. I think that they're both great in their own way, and I think that I'm glad that both genres exist, working these things the way they are, because that way I get two different kinds of experiences when I'm in the mood for some RPG questing. Another difference between the JRPG and the Western RPG is certainly the focus on character development. And this has become a little bit muddier in recent years because JRPGs have given players a lot more options in terms of how they customize their characters and whatever, but the Western RPG was the one where you were really given a blank slate character and then had dozens and dozens of different statistics to manage, and how you decided to level the character up in terms of their statistics, the equipment you gave them, and the skills that you allowed them to learn would end up impacting how you actually played the game. So, for an example, Kingdoms of Amalur here, you have three base kind of classes. There's the sorcerer, the rogue, and the warrior, and how you give your characters skills and whatever actually dictate what kind of path that character takes, and you have an awful lot of control over it. So you can mix and match skills between rogue and sorcerer, sorcerer and warrior, and whatever. And that's different again to JRPGs, where traditionally the roles are kind of set in stone. So the thief is always a thief in Final Fantasy. Riku in Final Fantasy X can't really be customized to the point that she's the kind of beefy warrior like Auron was. I know there was that sphere grid, but it was certainly every element about the game design was there to force each character into a particular role within the party. And again, I'm not suggesting that either is better or worse in this case. I think that they're both just different approaches that are enjoyable in their own way, but there is that, again, that sense of openness to the Western RPG. Openness in terms of the way the narrative works, openness in terms of the way that your character development works, and a little bit less, perhaps, focus as a result. So they feel like they're less focused experiences because they're more about living in the world and just kind of participating in it than having that singular drive through an experience. So anyway, that is basically the two major differences that I see between the Western RPG and the Japanese RPG. Obviously, aesthetically, they're different as well. Japanese RPGs are rooted in anime traditions, really, and that goes back to the origins of the Japanese RPG. Even the ones that try to be a little bit more realistic as such, like Final Fantasy 15, for example, the character models try to be fairly mature and realistic in design. Even those games have plenty of anime-like elements in terms of the enemy designs. They're all very outlandish and very colourful and bright, whereas a game like Amalur tends to be more rooted in the realist look, and while there are some certainly outlandish monsters and whatever, there is an aesthetic focus on realism that, again, it's different. It's not better or worse, it's just different. So yeah, the aesthetics are also a little bit different. Anyway, that's enough for this video. I'd be very interested in hearing your own thoughts about the differences between Western RPGs and Japanese RPGs. If you prefer one or the other, the reasons that you do prefer one or the other, do let me know, because I'm very neutral. I like both equally, but I do know that plenty of people have their preferences, and yeah, I look forward to hearing from you. Please do like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. That way I can continue to grow this channel. Please do consider backing me on Patreon, because that support helps me to increase the ambitions that I have for the channel. Otherwise, we will be back later this week with some more videos, no doubt. Have a great week, everybody, otherwise, and we will see you soon.